The ring felt heavier than it should have as I slipped it off my finger. The engagement band, a simple gold circle with a small diamond, sat ominously on the marble countertop. It wasn't supposed to feel like a shackle. Not yet. Not while Evan still looked at me like I was the center of his universe. At least, that's what I thought until 2 nights ago. It all started with an innocent enough question. Why does Evan always turn his phone upside down when we're together? A whisper of suspicion grew louder when I noticed how his eyes Evan had been in the shower. His phone left unattended on the nightstand. I didn't mean to snoop. Okay, maybe I did. The glowing notification caught my eye. Reminder. Dinner with Elise at the Bordeaux. The Bordeaux, my hands moved faster than my brain could stop them. I tapped the notification, and there it was, Elise. A picture-perfect woman with soft curls and a radiant smile. A fiancé. Another fiancé. She even had a ring that looked just like mine. Only hers had a slightly larger diamo. I froze, the blood in my veins turning to ice. Was this some elaborate joke? A prank? No. A quick dive into his calendar app revealed a meticulous schedule, splitting his life between me in Chicago and Elise in Denver. I wasn't just his fiancé. I was one half of his double L the next morning. I called in sick to work, needing time to process this betrayal. By mid-afternoon, my grief had calcified into rage. I wouldn't let Evan waltz out of this unscathed. He thought he was clever? Well, 2 could play this GA by evening. I had a plan. I called my best friend, Liv. She didn't hesitate to offer up her connections. Within hours, I had secured a burner phone, a sleek black suit, and a fake backstory. I was about to become one of Evan's clients. He worked for a high-profile firm, Parker & Howe, known for their discretion and ruthless efficiency. Perfect. You're sure about this, Sophie? Liv asked as I adjusted my wig in the mirror. The ash blonde bob made me almost unrecognizable. It's risky. I'm done being the nice girl, I replied, tugging at my blazer. If Evan wants to live a double life, he's about to learn what it feels like to lose control of both sides. A week later, I walked into Parker & Howe's skyscraper, clutching a briefcase full of fake documents. The receptionist led me to Evan's office, her heels clicking like a metronome against the polished floor. My heart raced as I stepped inside. Evan looked up, his professional mask slipping for a moment before he recovered. Miss? Claire Donovan, I said smoothly, extending a hand. I need your help with a delicate legal matter. His brow furrowed slightly, but he shook my hand. Of course, Miss Donovan. Please, have a seat. How can I assist you? I perched on the edge of the chair, laying the briefcase on his desk. I'm being blackmailed, I said, my voice trembling just enough to seem authentic. Someone claims to have compromising photos of me. If these get out, it could ruin my career. Evan's lips pressed into a thin line. That's a serious allegation. Do you have any idea who's behind it? I shook my head. That's why I need someone like you. A lawyer who can handle this discreetly. My reputation can't afford public scrutiny. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here he was, the master of duplicity, offering to protect me from exposure. Don't worry, he said, leaning forward with a reassuring smile. We specialize in cases like this. I'll personally oversee everything. Perfect. As the weeks passed, I played the role of Claire Donovan to perfection. I met with Evan twice a week, feeding him a fabricated tale of betrayal and extortion. He was charming, attentive, and entirely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to implode. I kept digging. With Liv's help, I hacked into Evan's work emails, uncovering more of his secrets. It wasn't just Elise. There were others. Flings in Los Angeles, a long-term girlfriend in New York. Evan's life was a sprawling web of lies, each thread more tangled than the last. But the real twist came when I followed him to Denver. I arrived in Denver under the guise of a business trip. Evan had no idea I was in town. I waited outside Elise's apartment, hidden in the shadows as he arrived with a bouquet of roses. I watched as he kissed her, his demeanor warm and tender. It was a side of him I'd never seen before, a side he'd never shown me, fueled by a mix of jealousy and determination. I decided to confront Elise. The next morning, I knocked on her door, introducing myself as Claire Donovan. Elise invited me in, her curiosity outweighing her suspicion. "I need to talk to you about Evan," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I think he might be hiding something from you." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone, showing her the pictures I'd taken of Evan with another woman in New York. Elise's face turned pale as she scrolled through the evidence. I don't understand," she stammered. "He said he was going there for work. He told me the same thing," I said softly. "Elise, I think Evan is living a double life." Tears welled up in her eyes, but there was something else, something sharp and calculating. "Then we're going to make him pay," she said, her voice steely. And just like that, I had an unexpected ally. Evan had no idea the storm that was brewing. Elise and I spent the next week strategizing, combining our resources to dismantle his carefully constructed facade. We planned to confront him together, but fate had other ideas. The day of our planned ambush, I received a frantic call from Liv. "Sophie, you need to come back to Chicago. Now." "What's wrong?" I asked, alarmed. "It's your mom. She's in the hospital." My heart sank. In the midst of my vendetta, I'd neglected my family. I boarded the first flight back, leaving Elise to handle the confrontation alone. I trusted her to follow through, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When I returned to Chicago, I found more than just a family crisis waiting for me. Evan was there, sitting in my living room, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. And that's when I realized Evan knew. Evan sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands gripping his knees like they were the only thing keeping him upright. His usual polished appearance was unraveling. Tie askew, hair mussed, and a shadow of stubble that I had never seen before. Whatever he had to say, it was big. My stomach churned. "I know what you've been doing," he began, his voice tight with suppressed anger. I feigned confusion. "What are you talking about, Evan?" He tossed a folder onto the coffee table. It slid open, revealing grainy photos of me meeting Elise outside her apartment. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to remain calm. "You've been following me," he accused, his eyes boring into mine. "Spying on me. Manipulating me." The audacity of his indignation made me laugh. A sharp, bitter sound that seemed to catch him off guard. "You're accusing me of manipulation? That's rich, coming from you." Evan's jaw tightened. "This isn't a game, Sophie. Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused?" "Oh, I have some idea," I shot back. "But don't pretend you're the victim here. You're the one with a fiancé in every time zone." His silence was deafening. For a moment, I thought I'd won. But then he leaned back, crossing his arms. "Fine," he said coolly. "You want to play dirty? Let's talk about your secrets." I froze. "What are you talking about?" He smirked, pulling out his phone. With a few swipes, he held up a message thread that made my blood run cold. They were texts between me and another man, Daniel. Daniel, the one mistake I thought I'd buried forever. It had been a drunken night, months before Evan proposed. We'd met at a work party, bonded over our mutual love of 80s music, and one thing led to another. It was a one-time slip, and I had convinced myself it didn't matter. Until now, Evan stood, towering over me. "Who's Daniel?" he demanded. I swallowed hard. "He's no one, just a friend. A friend who sends you texts like, 'Last night was incredible'? A friend who you conveniently forgot to mention?" His voice was rising now, the calm mask slipping to reveal the fury beneath. It was before we got engaged," I stammered. "It didn't mean anything." "Does he know that?" Evan shot back. "Because I've been doing some digging, Sophie. Daniel's been asking questions. He's looking for you." My heart sank. If Daniel was reaching out, it could only mean one thing. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Evan's eyes narrowed. "You're a terrible liar." He pulled out another piece of paper, this one a paternity test request. "I hope for your sake this isn't what I think it is," he said, tossing it onto the table. The next few weeks were a blur of chaos. Evan insisted on the paternity test, and while I waited for the results, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world was collapsing. Elise had gone radio silent, likely spooked by Evan's discovery. Liv tried to console me, but even she seemed uncertain about where my loyalties lay. And then came the results. The baby wasn't Evan's. It was Daniel's. I hadn't even known I was pregnant. Evan's reaction was chilling. He didn't yell or throw things. He simply walked out the door, leaving behind a single note, "We're done." At first, I felt relieved. I didn't want him to stay out of obligation, but as the days turned into weeks, his absence gnawed at me. Despite everything, I had loved him, or at least the version of him I thought I knew. But Evan wasn't gone for good. One night, as I was packing up his things, I found a slip of paper tucked inside his briefcase. It was an itinerary for a flight to Denver. Of course, Elise. Fueled by a mix of curiosity and desperation, I decided to follow him. If he was going to run back to her, I needed to know how this tangled web of lies would finally unravel. When I arrived in Denver, I didn't have to look far. Elise was staying at a swanky hotel downtown, and Evan's car was parked right outside. I steeled myself, marching into the lobby and taking the elevator to her suite. I expected to find them together, maybe even mid-reconciliation. What I didn't expect was to walk in on Elise with another man. She gasped, pulling a sheet around herself as the man, tall, broad-shouldered, and very clearly not Evan, scrambled to his feet. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice dripping with venom. Elise's face turned crimson. "This isn't what it looks like." "Oh, it looks like you're cheating on your fiancé," I snapped. "But I guess that makes you and Evan a perfect match." The man, who I later learned was Elise's high school sweetheart, looked mortified. "Wait, you're Evan's fiancé?" he asked. "Ex-fiancé," I corrected. "And who are you?" "Elise's husband," he said grimly. The room descended into chaos. Elise tried to explain, but her excuses only made things worse. Apparently, she had married her high school sweetheart in secret years ago, keeping him stashed away while she played the perfect fiancé to Evan. The audacity was almost impressive. As the truth came out, I realized how deeply Evan and I had underestimated her. She wasn't just another victim of his lies. She was playing her own game, and she was winning. But then Evan arrived. He walked into the room, freezing when he saw the four of us. Me, Elise, her husband, and the tangled mess of their deception. For the first time, Evan looked genuinely speechless. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Elise crossed her arms, her composure returning. "Oh, don't play dumb, Evan. You're not exactly innocent here." Evan's gaze shifted to me, his eyes filled with betrayal. "You knew?" "Of course I knew," I shot back. "Did you really think you could keep this charade going forever?" Elise's husband, fed up with the drama, stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The tension in the room was suffocating. "This isn't over," Elise said, her voice cold and sharp. "Not for any of us." And she was right. The real fallout was just beginning. The silence after Elise's husband stormed out felt like the calm before a tornado. Evan stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists, while Elise glared at both of us as though she was the wronged party. For a moment, I wondered if the walls of the hotel suite could contain all the lies swirling between us. "Let's talk about this like adults," Evan finally said, his voice dangerously calm. Elise scoffed. "Oh, now you want to be rational? Spare me, Evan." The tension was unbearable. I wanted to yell, to scream at both of them, but something in Elise's icy demeanor made me pause. She wasn't just angry, she was planning something. "Elise," I said cautiously, "you're married, yet you were engaged to Evan. Don't you think you owe us an explanation?" She rounded on me. "Oh, don't act high and mighty, Sophie. You're pregnant with another man's baby, and you were still wearing his ring." My stomach dropped. She wasn't wrong, but it stung to hear it thrown in my face. I opened my mouth to respond, but Evan cut me off. "Enough," he snapped. We're not solving anything by tearing each other apart. He turned to Elise. Are you even going to try to explain yourself? Or was this entire relationship just some kind of game to you? Elise smirked, an expression so smug it made my blood boil. A game? Please. If anything, you're the one playing games, Evan. Do you honestly think I didn't know about your little trips to New York? Or the woman you're seeing in Los Angeles? Evan's face paled. For the first time, he looked genuinely rattled. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice tight. Oh, spare me the lies, Elise snapped. You're a textbook narcissist, Evan. I just beat you at your own game. After the confrontation, I left the hotel, my head spinning. The revelations about Evan and Elise had turned my entire plan on its head. What was I even fighting for anymore? Revenge? Closure? At that moment, it felt like I was chasing shadows. But I didn't have long to dwell on it. When I returned to my hotel room, I found Daniel waiting for me. How did you find me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his expression a mix of anger and hurt. It wasn't hard, Sophie. You left a trail. And after I saw the paternity test, I had to talk to you. I braced myself, expecting a tirade, but Daniel surprised me. He sat down and rubbed his temples, looking more defeated than furious. I don't care about Evan or any of this drama, he said. I just want to know where we stand. The question caught me off guard. Where did we stand? I barely knew anymore. My life was a labyrinth of lies, and Daniel was just another thread tangled in the mess. But I couldn't ignore the truth. He was the father of my child. I don't know, I admitted. I'm still trying to figure everything out. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. Well, figure it out fast, Sophie, because I'm not going to wait forever. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, the fallout from Evan's double life was making waves. Liv called me one evening, her voice frantic. You won't believe what's happening, she said. Evan's firm is under investigation. What? I gasped. For what? Fraud, she replied. Apparently, someone leaked documents showing that he and a few other partners were embezzling funds from their clients. My jaw dropped. Do you think it was Elise? Who else? Liv said. That woman's a snake. But Sophie, this is serious. If Evan gets implicated, it could ruin him. Part of me felt vindicated. He deserved some form of punishment after everything he'd done. But another part of me hesitated. Was I really willing to watch him lose everything? No matter how much I hated him, I couldn't shake the memories of the man I'd fallen in love with. The next time I saw Evan, he was a shadow of his former self. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look like the confident, calculating lawyer I'd known. Did you know about the investigation? He asked, his voice hoarse. I nodded. Liv told me. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. This wasn't supposed to happen, he muttered. I was careful. I had everything under control. Did you? I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my tone. Because from where I'm standing, your whole life is falling apart. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Desperation, maybe. I need your help, Sophie. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You've got to be kidding me. I'm serious, he said. You know me better than anyone. You can help me clear my name. Why would I do that? I asked. After everything you've done, why should I lift a finger for you? His shoulders slumped. Because, despite everything, I still love you. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I almost believed him. But then I remembered Elise, Daniel, and all the other women whose lives he'd upended. Evan didn't know how to love anyone but himself. I can't help you, I said, my voice steady. You need to fix this mess on your own. As Evan's life spiraled further out of control, I focused on rebuilding mine. I reached out to Daniel, hoping to salvage some semblance of a relationship for the sake of our child. To my surprise, he was willing to give me a second chance. We're going to be parents, he said, his voice filled with cautious hope. That's worth fighting for, isn't it? I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving towards something real. But just as I thought I was leaving the chaos behind, a knock on my door changed everything. It was Elise. "We need to talk," she said, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "Why would I want to talk to you?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Because Evan's not the only one with secrets," she said. "And if you don't hear me out, you'll regret it." Against my better judgment, I let her in. And what she told me turned my entire world upside down. Elise stepped into my living room like she owned the place, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Her air of confidence was unnerving, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, fear. "Let's skip the pleasantries," I said, folding my arms. "What do you want, Elise?" She smirked, but it lacked her usual venom. Straight to the point. "I can respect that." She settled into a chair, crossing her legs with calculated poise. "You think you know Evan, don't you? That he's some manipulative, heartless monster who lied to both of us." "I don't think it, I know it," I shot back. Her smirk widened. "Oh, Sophie, you only know the half of it." I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay calm. "If you've got something to say, just spit it out." Elise leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Evan isn't just a liar. He's a criminal." For the next hour, Elise unraveled a story so twisted, I could barely keep up. According to her, Evan's involvement in the embezzlement scheme went deeper than anyone suspected. The investigation Liv mentioned? Elise had orchestrated it, leaking documents to authorities as part of her plan to destroy him. But her motives weren't entirely altruistic. "I wasn't just his fiancé," she said. "I was his accomplice. Or at least, that's what he wanted me to be." She explained how Evan had used his position at Parker and how to siphon funds from wealthy clients, laundering the money through offshore accounts. Elise claimed she had only gone along with it at first because she thought it was a harmless game, a way to outwit the rich and powerful. But when she realized the full scope of his operation, she panicked. "I tried to back out," she said, her voice trembling. "But Evan threatened me. Said he'd ruin me if I talked." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my skepticism mounting. "What do you want from me?" Elise hesitated, her confidence faltering for the first time. "I need your help. Evan's unraveling, and if he goes down, he'll take me with him." I stared at her, incredulous. "You want me to save you from a mess you helped create?" "I want us to save ourselves," she corrected. "If we work together, we can make sure Evan pays for everything he's done without dragging us down with him." Against my better judgment, I agreed to hear her out. Elise laid out a plan to gather more evidence against Evan. Emails, financial records, anything that could solidify his guilt. She was convinced he had hidden files at his apartment, and she needed me to help retrieve them. That night, as I stood outside Evan's building with Elise, I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into a trap. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. "Are you sure about this?" I whispered. Elise nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We have to do this. If we don't, he'll win." We slipped inside, the faint hum of the elevator filling the silence as we ascended to his floor. Elise had a key, one of the many perks of being his fiancée, but as she turned it in the lock, my heart pounded in my chest. The apartment was eerily quiet. Evan was supposed to be out of town, but the stillness felt unnatural. We crept through the space, searching for anything that might incriminate him. Elise went to his office, rifling through drawers, while I checked the living room. I was scanning a bookshelf when I heard a faint creak behind me. I turned, and my blood ran cold. Evan was standing in the doorway. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Elise appeared behind me, her face pale but defiant. "We're done playing your games, Evan. It's over." His eyes flicked between us, calculating. "You think you're going to take me down? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Don't we?" I challenged, holding up a flash drive I'd found in one of his drawers. "What's on here, Evan? More of your dirty secrets?" He lunged toward me, but Elise stepped between us, blocking his path. You don't scare me anymore, she said, her voice steady. This ends now. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent a shiver down my spine. You think you're the heroes in this story? He sneered. You're not. You're just as guilty as I am. He turned to Elise. You helped me move that money. And Sophie, he added, his gaze piercing, do you really think Daniel's going to stick around when he finds out about this? My stomach twisted. What are you talking about? Evan smirked. You really think Daniel's the father of your baby? I froze. What are you saying? You should have read the fine print on that paternity test, he said. The sample wasn't from Daniel, it was mine. The revelation hit me like a freight train. My mind raced, trying to piece together the implications. If Evan was telling the truth, then everything I thought I knew about my future had just been obliterated. You're lying, I said, my voice shaking. You're just trying to mess with me. Am I? He said, his expression smug. Why don't you ask Daniel? Or better yet, run another test. See for yourself. Elise grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. We're leaving, she said firmly. But as we fled the apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that Evan wasn't bluffing. And if he was the father of my child, then he had a hold on me that I couldn't escape. Back at my apartment, Elise and I tried to regroup, but the tension between us was palpable. The cracks in our alliance were beginning to show. You knew, didn't you? I accused. About the paternity test? Elise's eyes widened. Of course not. Do you really think I'd keep something like that from you? I wanted to believe her, but my trust in everyone was shattered. As we argued, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. We need to talk. Now, when I met Daniel the next day, his expression was a mix of anger and confusion. He handed me a piece of paper, a new paternity test. My heart raced as I read the results. Evan was telling the truth. The baby was his. I don't understand, Daniel said, his voice breaking. How could you not know? I didn't, I stammered. I swear, Daniel, I didn't know. He shook his head, stepping back as if I were a stranger. I can't do this, Sophie. I thought we had a chance, but now. He left without another word, leaving me standing there, the weight of my mistakes crushing me. As the walls closed in, I realized that Evan still held all the power, and if I wanted to protect myself and my child, I would have to find a way to beat him at his own game. The city was bathed in an eerie, pre-dawn light as I sat in my car outside Parker and Howe. The flash drive Elise and I had stolen sat in the passenger seat, its silver casing glinting like a loaded gun. I had spent the entire night staring at its contents, piecing together the truth hidden in the encrypted files. It was worse than I imagined. Evan hadn't just been embezzling. He had constructed a sprawling empire of deceit, with fraudulent shell companies and falsified legal settlements masking millions of dollars in stolen funds. But the true bombshell wasn't about money. It was about me. Buried in the files was a document labeled simply Sophie. My hands shook as I opened it, finding a detailed timeline of my life over the past 3 years. Evan had orchestrated everything. Our meeting, our relationship, even the moments I thought were serendipitous coincidences. It was all part of a larger scheme. Hours later, I sat across from Elise in a dingy diner, the flash drive between us. Her face paled as I showed her the document. He was watching me long before we met, I explained, my voice barely a whisper. My job, my friends, my family. He knew everything. Elise's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. Why? What could he possibly gain if I hesitated? The truth too monstrous to fully comprehend. I think I was his alibi. Her eyes widened. Alibi? For what? I pulled out another document, a copy of a legal settlement from years ago. It was a wrongful death case involving a woman named Bethany Hayes. She had worked for one of Evan's clients, and her death had been ruled accidental. But the settlement suggested something darker. Bethany had been digging into Evan's illegal activities, and her death had silenced her. He needed someone to make him look normal, I continued. A fiancé, a future wife, a shield against suspicion. Elise stared at me, horrified. You mean he used you as cover for a murder? I nodded, the weight of it all pressing down on me. And he was prepared to do it again if we got too close to the truth. The realization hit us both at the same time. Evan wouldn't stop until he had silenced everyone who could expose him. Elise and I were at the top of that list. We have to act fast, Elise said, her voice steely. If we don't, he'll destroy us. I nodded. But we can't just go to the police. He's too good at covering his tracks. Elise leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. Then we'll make him confess. The plan was simple in theory, but the execution was anything but. Elise reached out to Evan, pretending to want a truce. She lured him to a private meeting at a secluded cabin outside the city. Meanwhile, I set up surveillance equipment, ensuring we captured every word. When Evan arrived, he was wary but intrigued. Elise played her part perfectly, feigning vulnerability as she poured him a glass of wine. I'm tired, Evan, she said, her voice trembling. I don't want to fight anymore. Let's just talk. He relaxed, his guard lowering as she guided the conversation toward his schemes. It didn't take much for his arrogance to surface. You think you can outsmart me? He scoffed, swirling his wine. I've been 10 steps ahead of you from the beginning. Elise leaned in, her expression unreadable. You're right. I can't outsmart you, but I can understand you. Evan smiled, mistaking her words for submission. That's why you were always my favorite, Elise. You had the potential to be as ruthless as me. And Bethany Hayes? Elise asked, her voice carefully measured. Was she ruthless too? The question caught him off guard. His eyes narrowed. What are you getting at? I know what you did, Elise said, her tone sharpening. You killed her. Evan's face darkened. Careful, Elise. You don't want to make accusations you can't prove. Oh, but I can prove it, she said, pulling out the flash drive. Everything's on here. Your shell companies, your fake settlements, and your connection to Bethany's death. For a moment, I thought Evan might lash out, but then he laughed, a cold, menacing sound. You think you're in control? You're nothing but pawns in my game. Elise met his gaze, her confidence unwavering. Not anymore. At that moment, I stepped out from the shadows, holding up a phone. It's over, Evan. We have everything recorded. His expression shifted, a flicker of fear crossing his face before he masked it with fury. You think this will stop me? I'll destroy you both. Not if you're in prison, I said. Evan lunged toward me, but Elise intercepted him, her knee driving into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air, as I grabbed the flash drive and bolted for the door. The recording, combined with the evidence on the flash drive, was more than enough to bring Evan down. Elise and I handed everything over to the authorities, and within weeks, Evan was arrested on charges ranging from embezzlement to conspiracy to commit murder. The media frenzy that followed was overwhelming, but for the first time in months, I felt free. Elise and I parted ways shortly after Evan's trial began. We weren't friends, but we shared a bond forged in the fire of betrayal and survival. As for Daniel, he eventually reached out, apologizing for the way he'd left things. We agreed to co-parent, determined to give our child a better future than the chaos we'd endured. Months later, as I stood on my balcony overlooking the city, I thought about how close I had come to losing everything. Evan had been a master manipulator, but his hubris had been his downfall. And while the scars of his deception would take time to heal, I knew one thing for certain. I would never let anyone control my story again. As I turned to head inside, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Elise. We did it. I smiled, a mix of relief and resolve washing over me. The nightmare was over, but the lessons would stay with me forever.